What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show.
When they came down to initially do this, what years did you say that was again? Like the 70s, something like that?
They started they signed the agreement to go into this area in 1964. They drilled their first well in 1967 in a place now called Lago Agrio, Ecuador. And then they really built this system in earnest through the 70s and I'd say up to the mid-80s. And then they left in 1992.
Were they doing this on lands that quite literally some of the indigenous tribes are living on? Meaning like they're drilling a hole next door right here and I'm sitting, you know, in the middle of my community watching them do this. Was it that close or was it a little bit out in the woods so maybe they didn't realize the extent of what was happening there? Like
It was all done on indigenous land, every last well. And let me explain what that means, okay? Because the forest is vast and you could be in the forest as an outsider or even fly over it and not see a single person. I mean, it's very, you know, because the trees, the canopy, there are some villages, but even then it's hard to really, people lived like a very natural lifestyle based off of the environment. I mean, there were no roads or anything like that. The roads did not really get built until Texaco arrived in the 1960s and had to build the roads in order to create the production apparatus to extract oil. So all of these wells were built on indigenous territory. They were all done without asking the permission of the indigenous peoples or without sort of offering them any benefit, any of the revenue, not that they would want it because they lived a completely you know, non-monetary existence. I mean, they didn't have money as we understand money. But by the way, that didn't mean they weren't wealthy. They were very wealthy. Their wealth was not quantified by how we do it up here in the United States.
It's not modern
North.
society.
Yeah, exactly. So it was all in indigenous territory. The first well was built in what's now called Lago Agrio, which is really the territory of the Kofan indigenous group.
Yeah, we have that map. Yeah. Alessi has that up on the screen right there. So
that's an interesting map. Those are all the different oil fields in the concession area. So remember I said it was 1,500 square miles in that large area, which is represented by the outline of that, you know, kind of squiggly box, are different oil fields. And Lago Agrio at the top was the first field that they developed.
And these are, I'm looking at the scale of the map here. The bottom right corner shows the size of what is 20 kilometers. These are huge.
Huge.
This is far more than a mile across.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is many miles. I mean, I'd say it's from the bottom to the top is probably 100 miles, maybe 50 miles. I don't really know, but
maybe more even.
Maybe more. Yeah. It's big area. And it's, you know, thousands of people live in this area. I mean, when they first went there, there were fewer people. And what ended up happening is as the roads were built for the oil development, people from other parts of Ecuador would come down to this area and squat. They became squatters, non-indigenous people, and they would farm the land. So there was an influx of people on the back of the oil development that created the population that lives down there now. Now, the pollution affects indigenous and non-indigenous people alike. And one of the distinguishing features of our campaign and our lawsuit is that the indigenous and non-indigenous people have combined into one group for the purpose of holding Chevron accountable for this atrocity.
That's not really a common thing down there.
No, it's not. I mean, look, when I got there in the early 90s, there were some resentments because the indigenous people felt not only violated by Texaco, now Chevron, but they also felt encroached upon by non-indigenous people who were like taking advantage of the oil infrastructure development to move to this region and basically live and farm indigenous land. But you need to understand the indigenous peoples don't have a capitalist system.
Right.
Okay. And what does that mean? They just sort of had an understanding that the forest was theirs. They never marked it with a fence. They never got land title as we understand land title in a capitalist economy. So if one were to come down who's non-indigenous and sort of take a plot of land and get title to it, they're essentially stealing indigenous land. And the indigenous people, in my experience, at least back then, didn't think in terms of, personal acquisition of property or money. It was all very collective oriented. And I think it made them vulnerable to companies like Texaco, now Chevron, to come in and just take over their stuff without telling them. So in any event, it ended up over time becoming an absolutely awful environmental disaster. We think it's the worst oil disaster in the world. It's called the Amazon Chernobyl by many experts.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And what's different about it from other oil disasters people might have heard of, like the Exxon Valdez in Alaska or the Deepwater Horizon BP disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, is this was done incrementally and deliberately over many years. It was not a function of one spectacular event that got a lot of news attention. It was a function of a deliberate policy to pollute in order to save money, but over time it created something far worse. Not that I like to compare disasters. I know they're all bad, but far worse than any of those disasters. I mean, this is 100+ times the size of the Exxon Valdez disaster.
Well, what's crazy is you started on this 31 years ago in 93, but when you get there in 93, according to what you told me, it's been going on for 26 years.
Yes.
So what I want to know is, where's the Ecuadorian government 10 years into that, 5 years into that, 15 years into that? Why does it take a group of 15 people on basically like a missionary trip, so to speak, in a way, coming down here saying something's wrong for people to start do something about it?
Well, first of all, the role of the Ecuadorian government is interesting, and it's a little complicated. First of all, at the time Texaco, now Chevron, first went in there in the 60s, there was a military government. Ecuador did not have an elected government.
Okay.
So the army, the military in Ecuador cut the deal to do this. And by the way, Texaco, Chevron, a lot of these big oil companies love working with sort of non-democratic governments because it just makes it easier and more efficient for them. And part of their original agreement is the army of Ecuador was going to provide security for them. An army that's purpose is to defend the nation was actually providing private security to a private oil company against its own people. That's what this ended up happening over the years.
They must have paid well.
Exactly. And Ecuador's government, that is the elites in Ecuador, made a lot of money out of this deal. In other words, Texaco, now Chevron, did all the production. They were the operator of all these fields because, no one in Ecuador knew how to do this. And they would then sell the oil and pay a percentage to Ecuador's government for the right to operate down there. I mean, Ecuador's government negotiated some really bad deals and could have made a lot more money, but that was the arrangement for many, many years. And then when Chevron left, and I'm just going to call it Chevron for purposes of ease here, when they left in 1992, Ecuador by then had developed enough expertise to have its own state oil company called Petro Ecuador, and they took over the entire operation and kept polluting.
Oh, so Chevron completely pulled out, and then Ecuador
took it over. Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So when you get down there, that's what's happening, because you're there in 93.
Exactly. But understand that our lawsuit is only against Texaco, now Chevron.
Yeah, because they built it.
Because they built it, they were exclusive operator.
Right.
They designed it, they engineered a system to pollute, and they are the ones really responsible. Now, when Ecuador took it over, they just kept operating it for the most part in the same way that Texaco had taught them to, And by the way, they have sued Petro Ecuador, Chevron has, as a way to what's called implead them, to try to get them to pay or at least share some of the liability from our lawsuit. But under the law, if you're harmed, you're not obligated to go find every little entity that contributed to your harm. You can sue whoever you want, and that one entity is responsible for 100% of the harm. Even if some of it was caused by other companies, they are then responsible if they feel other companies should share the burden to sue them. So it's a way to not require the victim of what's called a tort or some sort of harmful act to have to figure out who was involved. You can just sue one entity.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.